Today I want to talk to you about your picking hand and your picking hand speed. And if you're having a hard time building your picking speed to the level that you want, chances are one of the things you need to do to make more speed happen is to unlock your wrist. And the reason I say to unlock your wrist, by the way, I'll show you exactly what I mean in just a second, is because one mistake I see very often in guitar players I train is when they try to play something fast, they lock up their entire arm from the elbow on down like it's in a cast, and when they pick, when they try to move fast, it's all coming from the elbow. Now this can sometimes work, and in fact moving from the elbow is often necessary for playing certain things like really fast tremolo picking. But from playing most licks where you change strings and even do string skipping and playing scales and scale sequences, moving only from the arm and locking up your wrist is not going to work in most cases. One easy way you can tell if your wrist is too tight and you need to unlock it using the exercise I'll show you in a second is by looking at the space between the index finger and the thumb. If you see that it's closed up like this, like it is right now when I'm holding the pick, then you got way too much tension in your wrist and it's going to be very hard for you to play fast and be relaxed. You want to open up this space so you have more of an OK sign between the thumb and index finger when you pick. That's going to make your wrist a whole lot more relaxed and make it much easier to do the things I'm going to show you in just a second. Now before we go any further, of course there are exceptions to what I'm saying, and yes, there are great players who pick extremely fast and clean who use a more forearm dominant picking style, Vinnie Moore being one notable example. However, someone like Vinnie Moore actually does have a very unlocked and relaxed wrist. But you can see that when he plays this exercise slowly, he is moving with a very relaxed wrist motion. And this is completely different from having your wrist locked in tight and just moving with the forearm like your arm is in a cast and everything being tense from the top down. And even when he plays fast, moving mostly from the forearm, you can still tell that his body and his picking hand and arm is pretty much completely relaxed. And this is why he's able to stay in control and in sync with his two hands. This is completely opposite to the problem I just described a moment ago where your wrist is tense and you're squeezing, there's no space between the thumb and the index finger right here, and your entire picking hand, picking arm mechanism is locked up tight in tension. So to unlock your wrist, let's start really simple. Just take one note on the 9th fret on the G string, for example. So I want you to lock your forearm in place, put it in a comfortable spot, relax your shoulder and let the weight of the arm go into the guitar, and just pick the 9th fret using a very relaxed wrist motion. Make sure you have this OK sign between the thumb and index finger like we talked about before. Wrist motion, wrist motion, wrist motion. You would be surprised, but some people, when I tell them to do this, they have a hard time doing even this. Now, they can play notes at this speed, but they have a hard time separating the wrist from the forearm because they're so used to having their wrist locked in tight with the forearm like it's in a cast, and it's a difficult habit to break for some people. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, you're not going to be picking everything with the wrist at every speed, because even on one note, as you begin to increase your speed past a certain point, you'll have no choice but to engage your forearm to do really fast tremolo. Observe. But there's a difference between doing tremolo with a relaxed wrist and forearm and having everything really tight and constricted like this. And it all starts with being able to have an unlocked wrist, at least at slow tempos. Another example, play a simple A minor pentatonic scale and focus on moving your wrist as much as possible and your forearm as little as possible. You only want to move or adjust your forearm just enough to keep the wrist from bending an extreme amount like this. Observe. Again, you're not training yourself to play everything with the wrist. That's unrealistic and it's not the way to go. What you're trying to do is just learn what it feels like to separate the wrist from the forearm at slow tempos, so that when you are trying to play things fast, you can find the exact amount of degrees of wrist motion and the forearm motion to use depending on the lick you're trying to play. Now let's take an A major scale, for example, which is 3 notes per string, and play it again using mostly the wrist motion, only using the forearm as little as possible when it's absolutely necessary, or else the wrist is going to bend in some weird way which you don't want. It's going to look like this. Now, the good news about unlocking your wrist is it's not going to take you very long to feel some noticeable improvements in how loose and relaxed your picking starts to feel. And once that starts to happen, you can go back to the licks you're trying to build speed on, and this is when you start thinking and identifying exactly how much wrist motion and how much forearm is needed to play the licks at the speed you want to play. Now, even though I'm making a huge deal about unlocking your wrist and relaxing your wrist and emphasizing the wrist motion in your playing, and it's true that when you play most scale licks where you change strings or even when you skip strings, the wrist is going to play a huge role. There are also going to be many licks that you'll play that are going to be a lot more forearm dominant. I already gave you one example of really fast tremolo picking, the other one being just simple neoclassical single string licks like this. Now, I'd never be able to play licks like this fast if I locked up my wrist and my forearm with a lot of tension and I closed up all the space between the index finger and the thumb. It would just be impossible. Not gonna happen.
Not gonna work here anymore anyway.
At the same time though, I would also not be able to play the licks this fast if I only used my wrist. It wouldn't matter how relaxed the wrist was or how isolated it was from the forearm. At certain tempos, when it gets fast enough, when you're playing on one string, it's simply impossible to move the wrist quickly enough to sync it up with the fretting hand. That's why on many single string licks, they become more forearm dominant just due to their nature past a certain tempo threshold. At the same time though, many string skipping licks that you would think are like all forearm because you're skipping one or more strings are a lot more wrist dependent than you would think. You have to have your wrist very relaxed to play and be in sync on each individual string in between the string skips. So again, the idea is to simply have this unlocked, relaxed motion of the wrist down, at least at slow speeds, for everything, so that if and when you have to switch to forearm-dependent playing for faster playing, you can do that, but you aren't depending on just moving your forearm back and forth for everything you play. And as I often say, be very careful about blindly copying your favorite guitar players' picking hand motions, because just because they are moving their pick a certain way for certain types of licks at their skill level does not at all mean that you should be doing that for the licks that you're playing at your skill level with your guitar technique foundation and other variables that affect your playing. If you want to know more about what you should and shouldn't copy from guitar technique of your favorite players, check out my playlist on this topic that covers this in detail. In the meantime, if you want me to help you with your practicing, with your guitar technique and speed, identifying any bad habits that may be slowing your progress, I can help with that in my Rapid Fire Guitar Practice Training Program. There, I'm not just going into much more detail about everything I cover on this channel, but you and I can also sit down one-on-one. I can listen to your playing, look at your technique, tell you exactly what is keeping you stuck at your current skill level, tell you how to change this, and then if you do what I say, you can very often see results, often in just one practice session. Now, this program is not cheap, it's not for everybody, so please read the page carefully before making your decision. The link and all information is down in the description box below. If you like this video, hit the like button, subscribe to this channel, hit the bell so you're notified every time I upload a new video just like this for you. This is Mike Filipov, guitar practice expert from PracticeGuitarNow.com. See you next time.